Shaw, grading Sweetwater High School from Valle High School. I'm a senior here, and I'll be the second speaker for today's debate.
I'm Pamela Carmona. I'm a sophomore, and I'll be the first speaker for today's debate.
And we're ready to get started as soon as you are.
You want to go ahead and introduce yourself for the record too, please?
Hello, my name is Timothy St. Pierre. We're all here from Sweetwater High School. I'm a junior.
My name's Ty Campbell, and I'm also a junior here.
He'll be the first speaker. I'll be the second.
My name's Blake Fain, and I'm going to be the one answering questions in the end.
Okay, good. Thank you. Hopefully our judge will be here by then, but in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and start. Go ahead. Okay.
I go ahead?
Yeah,
Okay.
wow.
May it please the court, Your Honor, I, Pamela Carmona, and my partner Jacob Shaw will represent the people today in the case that the Americanist dream is dead. There will be 2 points of error and 2 arguments. I will represent the people on the first point of error and 2 arguments. As we have, the American dream as we have known it is dead. It's several forms since the founding of our nation is dead. From the first colonizations of the American continent, the American dream was based on individualism. Today, this dream has been replaced by the nightmare of twin troubles of collectivism and statism. Therefore, the American dream as we have known it since the beginning of time and the beginning of settlements has changed. The American dream as we have known it in the past is dead. In this court today, all we have to do to show that the American dream is dead is the American dream that has existed since 1776. If our opponents try to switch the argument by explaining that one American dream has been replaced with another one, I stand before you to say 2 words, Harrison Bergeron. Now, why did the early settlers come to America? It was for religious freedom. Now, this religion freedom was not for everyone. It was for themselves based on an individual belief system that only worked for believers like themselves. In the mid-18th century, this American dream was replaced by the dream of rugged individualism, pushing the frontier further and further west, represented by the idea that Yankee ingenuity could create an individual merchant into a very rich person. By the 1860s, the American dream had transferred into everyone wanting their own piece of land and the ability to farm it. This version of the American dream lasted until the early 1920s, when we entered into the age of consumerism, credit cards, time payments, and mortgages. For the almost 100 years, we have lived the American dream of ever-increasing demands for the consumer products, larger cars, and larger houses. We have lived through several wars, 1 large depression, several periods of inflation, a housing crisis, a bank crisis, a stock market crash, 2 stock market bubbles, a college tuition loan crisis that will quickly appear around the corner. Do not be fooled by our worthy opponents. They will undoubtedly tell you that the American dream is alive today and will try to change the fact that the American dream that has existed ever since before the founding of our nation, the one based on individualism and individual rights, is now officially dead. For this point of error, we will offer the following 8 structural facts. First, death of the individual home. Walter Russell Mead wrote in his June 2011 article about the death of the American dream. The news from the housing market this week is bad, really bad. Housing prices today are lower in most of the country than they were in the dismal month of April 2009. We are now in the second dip of the double dip housing downturn. Now, 4 years later, things are not much better, and in fact, in many cases, getting worse, as many baby boom generation people are retiring and selling their homes. It means something bigger. For 80 years, we have defined the American dream as an owner-occupied family home, preferably with a nice swath of crab grease-free lawn around it. The home mortgage was a centerpiece of society of consumers based on a debt-financed living. It was a life on the installment plan. The latest downturn in the housing market is one more grim signal that in its current form, the American dream is going the way of the dodo. At a home of your increasingly means a home of the banks. Today, some 86 million Americans live in homes that are underwater, where the amount owed on the mortgage is greater than the value of the house. Since the financial crisis began in 2008, over 1 million consumer mortgages have gone into foreclosure. Sales of bank-owned properties are now at 34.5% of the housing market. Homes in foreclosure waiting for resale now account for a 3-year supply on the sluggish housing market. The damage is heavy. For most Americans, their single biggest asset is the equity of their home. At the peak of the boom, total net home equity in the U.S. stood at $13 trillion. Today it is down to $6.5 trillion. America's home equity losses are greater than the GDP of Japan. The bad news has come at a bad time. The baby boomers, The least provident and most demanding generation in American history are beginning to hit retirement. For decades, many boomers comforted themselves with the illusion owning a home would provide them with the savings they would need in retirement. So many of them haven't paid off their mortgages, and they not only do not have a lot of equity left, in some cases they cannot afford to sell their depreciated homes. American housing policy has reached a dead end. We can no longer stimulate the economy successfully by encouraging more and more people to assume higher levels of debt. Decades of public policy aimed at subsidizing homeownership created conditions that spewed toxic mortgages into financial markets, costing taxpayers hundreds of billions in bailouts and trillions more in loss of wealth and loss of jobs and economic downturn, and created a ruinous housing bubble. It was not by any means a complete flop. Tens of millions of American families enjoyed the benefits of living in a home of their own. Prudent borrowers who bought only the house they needed and fought off the temptation to use their equity to finance their lifestyles have mostly not done too bad. Many homeowners can and will hang on until the unedible market correction pares their losses to a manageable level. Those lucky or far-sighted enough to buy at the right time are sitting on sizable profits. But something I think has changed, something big. Humpty Dumpty has fallen off the wall. A social idea has received an irrecoverable blow, and the era of consuming our way to prosperity is drawing to a close. The country has maxed out its credit cards, and we are going to have to live within our means. This isn't the first time the American dream has died. The old dream to own your own farm rather than your own home once dominated American culture, politics, and family life as much as the family home ever did. The slow and painful death of the dream was once of the country's core preoccupations in the first half of the 20th century. Second, today's American dream will die just like the first dream, owning your own farm. The ideal of the family farm was once even more deeply rooted in American life than the idea of an owner-occupied home. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the average American family owned and farmed a small piece of land. Cheap land on the frontier made the original American dream accessible to just about anybody. New immigrants and young people would work a few years to save up money for basic tools and equipment, head up west, and start a farm. From the Revolution through the Great Depression, one of the federal government's main concerns was to make loans cheap. Politicians also promoted the construction of railroads that allowed inland farms to ship products to distant markets and then worked to regulate railroad prices so that farmers could make a living. The old dream died from a combination of reasons. The closing of the frontier dried up the supply of free land, and the mechanization of agriculture made small farms uneconomic. Federal subsidies lured too many people onto the land. Many homesteads in part of the West were in climates unsuited to smaller holdings. A vast expansion of global acreage under the plow in the late 19th and early 20th centuries exposed small family farmers to tough global competition. The terms of trade between farm goods and town goods changed over the years. Farmers' incomes steadily fell in comparison to urban dwellers. The more complex and expensive farm techniques needed to meet the competition required farmers to spend more on equipment and education than their small farms could really support. Young people craved the excitement and the opportunity of urban life. The age of the family farm slowly and painfully drew to a close. In 1990, 41% of the Americans worked on farms. Today, fewer than 2% do. Third, the backbone of the American dream has been the ability of the average American to make money. Then came Dream 2.0. Home ownership in the suburbs accompanied by a consumer lifestyle based on credit card debt and the installment plan, anchored by a white or blue-collar good job. Once again, federal policy aimed to make the American dream open to any white male. Jobs were to be plentiful and mortgages cheap. Over time, we've extended the concept. You don't have to be a white or male to qualify for a good job, but the American social policy as a whole is recognizably an adaptation of our family farming heritage to the age of manufacturing. Now, the 2.0 dream is on the skids, and as a case of the death of the American family farm, more than one force is at work. Part of this is the breakup of the blue social model. In the heyday of the old economy, the average American job was long-term, life employment in the car factory, working for the phone company or the local bank, or working for the government. A 30-year mortgage with steady payments made a lot of sense in a world of lifetime employment. Today's careers are more volatile. Even when things go well, there are ups and downs and often spells of unemployment between gigs. Income growth is also unpredictable. Unions are negotiating givebacks rather than steady raises as of past generations, and the downsizing of whole industries and the decline in manufacturing employment means that millions of Americans must adjust to falling incomes as life goes on. A mortgage payment that seemed reasonable when father worked at Chrysler plant and becomes an unmanageable burden when the plant shuts down and he gets a job at 7-Eleven. Fourth, the American family structure is also changing. Divorce was rare in the middle class 50 years ago. A nation of kaleidoscopic family arrangements doesn't fit the 30-year mortgage pattern quite as well as we used to. Divorce creates two new households at a lower income than the original one, forces the split up of assets and the changes of nature of real estate markets. A nation with high divorce rates, all things being equal, and is a nation of worse credit risk than a nation that marries for life. The American household is also getting smaller. More people are remaining unmarried. Many married couples are having fewer children, while the shift to smaller households propped up house prices for a while. It tends to reduce the credit quality and slowly alters the nature of the housing market. Single-parent households have lowered incomes and are more exposed to unemployment. A single young person tends to be more mobile than their married counterparts. Single-parent, single-person, as smaller households generally tend to prefer smaller and more easily maintained resources. Fifth, the changes in the banking system have not helped consumers. The banking system is also well organized to offer low-rate 30-year mortgages than in the past. 50 years ago, interest rates were essentially regulated by the government, and the government worked to keep those rates stable for mortgage-oriented banks and savings loans. The inflation of the 1970s, the rise of the global financial markets, and the deregulation of interest rates that followed on these developments changed the way banks work and the environment they work in. The rise of instruments like mortgage-backed securities did not take place in a vacuum. If cheap long-term mortgage-backed securities financing was going to be available for American consumers at reasonable rates, banks would have to find ways of spreading the risk. With encouragement and support from the government, they shifted from being mortgage holding institutions to mortgage making institutions. Banks made their money from originating the loan and then passed it along. Sixth, for the past 50 years or more, the key to the American dream has been a good job, and the key to a good job has been a college degree. For many of today's college students and recent graduates, obtaining a degree means mortgage-like levels of debt without having a house or much of a job. To show for it, like housing in 2005, the institution of college education is firmly in the throes of a bona fide bubble that will end just as disastrously. College tuition costs are soaring and forcing our nation's young to bear obscenely high levels of student loan debt. While ballooning 1 trillion student loan bubble shares a strikingly scary resemblance to the toxic subprime mortgages of 6 years earlier, as more college presidents shamelessly bank $1 million per year on colleges to build mega million-dollar stadiums. Their graduates struggle to find the minimum wage jobs in the job market, the worst job market since the Great Depression. You know, there's a crisis when even young law school graduates are forced to become topless dancers to support themselves and their crushing student loan bills. At a time when college graduates' started salaries are dropping like a rock, it's ironic that the number of colleges and universities charging $50,000 per year has increased to 25-fold in the last 3 years. Without college tuition costs have risen 43.9% since 1982. It's no surprise that this phenomenon is drawing comparisons with the epic U.S. housing bubble at the last decade. It turns out that the college costs have risen far more than housing even rose at its peak. With housing have risen 4 times, while college tuition has soared by over 10 times, far outpacing the rate of inflation. Even more alarming than the rate of tuition growth is a blistering increase in total outstanding student loans, which grew 51.1% since 1999 to $1 trillion. With today's average student graduating with 50% more student debt than graduates in 2011, student loans made by federal government rose a white-hot 31.9% in the past 12 months through November of 2011. Even Moody is warning that the student loans may be the next financial bubble to burst. While a recent FICO survey shows that 2/3 of banks' risk managers are seriously concerned about student debt loans held by students in the country. To make matters worse, the student loan bubble is well on track to becoming subprime crisis 2.0. As many of the exact same mistakes during the subprime lending boom are being repeated, such as knowingly offering loans to borrowers who cannot afford them, as recent graduates struggle to stay afloat financially, overall, student loan defaults have risen to 8.8%, while default rates for nonprofit colleges loans are an astounding 25%. Have we learned nothing of the housing crisis? Seventh, the concept of the American dream itself is a bit of bait in the switch of advertisement. It was created in the depths of the Depression by James Truslow Adams, a popular historian at the time. In his preface of his 1931 book, The Epic of America, while defining the concept of the American dream, Adams wrote in his preface, while defending the concept of the American dream, he wrote that the American dream was a better and richer, happier life for all of our citizens of every rank, which is the greatest contribution we have yet made to the thought and welfare of the world. The dream or hope has been present from the start. Now cross-apply these facts today. On December 4th, 2014, all news outlets in the U.S. released an IMF report that said the Chinese economy just overtook the United States economy to become the largest in the world. For the first time since Ulysses S. Grant was president, America is not the leading economic power in the planet. As recently as 2000, we produced nearly 3 times as much as the Chinese. To put the numbers slightly differently, China now accounts for 16.5% of the global economy when measured in real purchasing power terms, compared with the US's 16.3%. This latest economic earthquake follows development last year when China surpassed the US for the first time in global trade. Clearly, the economic engine that has driven the American economy for the past 150 years has slowed down and given more problems for the American dream. Eighth, ask young people if they think they will obtain the American dream. In 2013, a survey was completed by young adults concerning the American dream. When asked, people can still explain how they define the American dream. The only problem is most of them don't think they have a shot of making it come true. Nearly 80% of those who responded to a recent survey said the American dream involving owning a home. About half of the respondents said going to college, getting married, or having children were also important. Sadly, only 43% of the survey respondents show that achieving the American dream is possible in this economy, according to a recent survey from personal finance site LearnBest and Chase Blueprint. Here's what's standing in the way of that dream. College costs too much. The price of undergraduate tuition, room, and board at public colleges in 2010 and 2011 was nearly double the cost from 1980 and 1981. Most of us are going into debt to fund mounting bills. The country's total student loan debt now surpasses $1 trillion. Marriage is less popular. In 1960, more than 2/3 of 20-somethings were married. By 2008, that number was more like 1/4, according to Pew Research. Few cannot afford to move out of mom's house. Only about 1/3 of the U.S. adults between the ages 18 and 32 live on their own, and another third are still stuck at home with mom and dad. Your Honor, clearly as you can see, the facts that show the American dream is not only unobtainable now, it is not sustainable by our generation, maybe the first generation of Americans, to not only obtain the American dream, but not to do as well as our parents have done. This is a new reality. This is a dream. A new dream is a nightmare for many Americans my age. If there are no further questions, I will retire, allow my partner to address the second point of error, and pray that you vote for the petitioners in this case.
I'll now begin with the second argument. May it please the court, Your Honor, I, Jacob Shaw, will address the second point of error. Please classify all my partner's 8 arguments. The second point of error is the concept of the American dream is only attainable, sustainable, or desirable for the population of the United States. Eldridge Cleaver said, I vote I am a citizen of the American dream. And the revolution struggle which I am a part of is a struggle against the American nightmare. I'll present 10 major facts to back up our arguments on this point of error. First, the American dream is now impossible to achieve in this country. So say nearly 6 in 10 people respond to CNN's 2014 My American Dream poll, conducted by ORC International. They feel the dream, however they define it, is out of reach. Young adults, age 18 to 34, are most likely to feel the dream is unattainable, while 63% saying it's impossible. The age group has suffered in the wake of the Great Recession, finding it hard to get good jobs. Young Americans are a cause of great concern. Many respondents say they are worried about the next generation's ability to prosper. Some 63% of all Americans said most of the United States won't be better off than their parents. California economics professor says it's crunched the numbers and has concluded that the American dream is in fact dead. Barry Clark, a researcher at the University of California, Davis, found that social mobility has diminished significantly in the past 100 years, reported KLVR TV. America has no higher rate of social mobility than medieval England or pre-industrial Sweden, Clark said. That's the most difficult part of talking about social mobility. It's because it's shattering people's dreams. He says social mobility is a little different in the United States than other countries, where ancestry strongly predicts adult social status. The status of your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and your great-great-grandchildren will be quite closely related to your average status now, Clark said. It's upsetting to many of his students. Clark said, my students are always arguing with me about things they define. It's very hard to accept it as the idea that much of their lives can be predicted from their lineage and their ancestry. Clark's findings, which were published by the Council on Foreign Relations, showed that Americans with French ancestry, for example, became doctors at a much lower rate than other immigrant groups. The French, who ran the United States, were overwhelmingly drawn from lower classes of Acadia and Quebec. As a result of demographic patterns and selective migration, Clark argued. The effects of this American dream are becoming increasingly unaffordable for the majority, if not all, of Americans today. Second, most people can't get ahead financially. If the American dream is a reasonable rate of income growth for working people, most people can't expect to achieve it. As Ben Councilman observes at 538.com, the middle class hasn't seen its wage rise in 15 years. In fact, the percentage of middle class households in this nation is actually falling. Median household income has fallen since the financial crisis of 2008, while income for the wealthiest Americans has actually risen. Thomas Edsel wrote in the New York Times that only has the wealth of the very rich doubled since 2000, but corporate revenues are at record levels. Edsel also observed that in 2013, according to Goldman Sachs, corporate profits rose 5 times faster than wages. When your middle class does not gain in wages and the wealthy become more wealthy, the American dream is surely dead. Third, the stay-at-home parent is a thing of the past. The American dream for almost 80 years was to buy a house, raise a family. Now they have taken away the ability to raise the family. There was a time when middle-class families could live a comfortable lifestyle on one person's earnings. One parent could work while others stayed home with the kids. Those days are gone. As Elizabeth Warren and co-author Amelia Warren Taggy documented in their 2003 book, The Two-Income Trap, the increased number of two-earner families are matched by rising costs in a number of areas such as education, home costs, and transportation. These cost increases combined with wage stagnation mean that families are struggling to make ends meet, and neither parent has the luxury of staying at home any longer. In fact, parenthood has become a financial risk. Warren and Taggy wrote that having a child is not the single best predictor a woman will end up in financial collapse. This book was written over a decade ago. Things are even worse today. Since that book, Elizabeth Warren has become a U.S. Senator, and the staying at home has become less common. Now, many times it takes 2 parents, plus sometimes the children working to just make it. This means that teenagers have grown up quickly in the world of work or have to be influenced by some of the greatest evils of our society without benefit of parental help. Fourth, the rich are more debt-free. Others have no choice. Most Americans are falling behind anyway, as their salary fails to keep them up with their expenses. No wonder debt is on the rise. As Joshua Friedman and Cheryl R. Schwiniger observed in a report from the New American Foundation, American households have become dependent on debt to maintain their standard of living in the face of stagnant wages. The debt-dependent economy, as Friedman and Schwiniger call it, has negative implications for the nation as a whole, but individual families are suffering too. Randy Mullah of the Wall Street Journal notes that over the past 20 years, the average increase in spending on items has exceeded the growth of incomes. This gap is especially poignant for those under 25 years of age. There are increasingly 2 classes of Americans, those who are taking on additional debt and the rich. The poor chasing the last vestiges of the American dream will be settled in debt that they will be relegated to an entire life decreased opportunity because of the debt. Fifth, student debt is crushing a generation of non-wealthy Americans. This is a trend that was the key for the baby boom generation to get ahead. The GI Bill after World War II allowed many veterans to go to college. The low tuition rates of the 1960s and 70s allowed many baby boom generation students the ability to attend college by working during the summer or school year to pay for their education. The mantra has always been education for every American who wants to get ahead. However, nowadays, forget about that. If you have to be rich to get a college education, that is, unless you want to begin your career with a mountain of debt. Once you get out of college, you'll quickly discover that the gap between spending and income is greater for people under 25 years of age. Education, as Forbes columnist Steve Odland put in 2012, is a great equalizer that facilitated the American dream. But at that point, college costs have risen 500% since 1985, but the overall consumer price index rose by 115%. As of 2013, tuition to private university was projected to cost only $30,000 on average over 4 years, that's accounting food, lodging, books, or other expenses. Public colleges and universities have long been viewed as a get-ahead option for all Americans, including the poorest among us. Not anymore. The University of California was once considered a national model for free, high-quality public education, but today, tuition at University of California, Berkeley is $12,972 per year. It was tuition free until Ronald Reagan became governor. Room and board is $14,414. The total cost of an on-campus attendance in Berkeley, including books and other items, is estimated to be $32,168. The California story has been repeated across the country as state cutbacks in the wake of the financial crisis caused the cost of public higher education to soar about 50% in a 2-year period. With a median national household income of $51,000, even public colleges are quickly becoming unaffordable. Sure, there are still some scholarship grants available, but even as college costs rise, the availability upon these programs is falling. Even middle class and lower income students further in debt as out-of-pocket costs rise. The twin problems of college tuition costs going up higher than the rate of inflation affect the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, officially nationalized the student loan program, particularly from a private banking business to become part of the United States federal government. The loan debt burden has been transferred from an individual to the entirety of the United States. When this bubble bursts, the weight of debt will be felt by everyone in this entire country. Sixth, vacations aren't for the likes of you anymore. Many things have been written about the family vacation in the United States. In fact, who could not help but laugh at the classic movie Family Vacation, starring Chevy Chase? Without a family vacation, was as American as apple pie. However, you'd think you'd like to have a nice vacation. But think again. According to a 2012 American Express survey, Americans were planning vacations that spend on average $1,180 per person. That's $4,720 for a family of 4. But then, why worry about it? Paying for that vacation. If you're unemployed, you can't afford it. And if you have a job, there's a good chance you won't get the time off anyway. At the Center for Economic and Policy Research found in 2013, the United States is the only advanced economy in the world that does not require employers to offer paid vacations to their workers. The number of paid holidays and vacation days received by the average worker in this country, 16, would not meet the statutory minimum requirements in 19 of the developed countries, according to CEPR. 31% of the workers and smaller businesses have paid no vacation days at all. CEPR also found that 40% of employees at large corporations also received no paid vacation days at all. Overall, roughly 1 in 4 working Americans gets no vacation time at all. Representative Alan Grayson, who has introduced the Paid Vacation Act, correctly notes that the average working American now spends 176 hours more per year on the job than was the case in 1976. Between the pressure to work more hours and the cost of vacation, even people who do get vacation time, at least on paper, are hard pressed to take any time off. That's why 175 million vacation days go unclaimed each year. 7th, even with health insurance, medical care is increasingly unaffordable for most people. Medical care when you need it? Well, that's for the wealthy. I don't know about you, but the American dream was based on being healthy. Can we still afford to get sick in this country? The answer will surprise many. The Affordable Care Act was designed to increase the number of Americans who are covered by health insurance. But health coverage in this country is the worst of any highly developed nation. And that's for people who have health insurance. Every year, the Milliman actuarial firm analyzes the average cost of medical care, including the household share of insurance premiums and out-of-pocket costs for a family of 4, with the kind of insurance that is considered higher quality coverage in this country. A PPO plan, which allows them to use a wider range of healthcare providers. Even as overall wealth in this country has shifted upward away from middle-class families, the cost of medical care is increasingly being borne by families themselves. As the Milliman study shows, the employer-funded portion of healthcare costs rose to 52% in 2007, the first year of the recession. But household costs have risen by a staggering 73%, or 8% per year, and now average $9,044. In the same period, Census Bureau figures show the median household income has fallen 8%. That means that household healthcare costs are skyrocketing, even as income falls dramatically. The recent claims of lower healthcare costs are misleading. While the rate of increase is slowing down, healthcare costs are continuing to increase, and the actual cost of working America is increasing even faster, as corporations continue to maximize their record profit by shifting healthcare costs onto consumers. The shift is expected to accelerate as a result of a misguided provision in the Affordable Care Act, which will tax higher cost plans. According to an OECD survey, the number of Americans report going without needed health care in the past year because of costs higher than 10 comparable countries. This is true for both lower income and higher income Americans, suggesting that insured Americans are also feeling the pinch when it comes to getting medical treatment. As inequality worsens, wages continue to stagnate, and more healthcare costs are placed on the backs of working families, more Americans will find medical care unaffordable. 8, Americans can no longer look forward to secure retirement. Want to retire when you get older, as earlier generations did, and do a secure life after a lifetime of hard work? Well, you'll get to, if you're rich. There was a time when most middle-class Americans could work until they were 65 and then look forward to a financially secure retirement. Corporate pensions guarantee the minimum income for the remainder of their life. Those pensions, coupled with Social Security income and lifetime savings, ensured that every ordinary American could spend their senior years in modest comfort. No longer, as we've already seen, rising expenses means most Americans are burdened in debt rather than able to accumulate modest savings. That's the main reason why 20% of Americans who are nearing retirement age haven't saved for their post-working years. Meanwhile, corporations are gutting these pensions plans in favor of far less general programs. The financial crisis of 2008, driven by the greed of Wall Street one percenters, robbed most American households of their primary assets. One group, that takes this global asset management, raised the United States 19th among developed countries when it comes to retirement security. The principal reasons why the US ranks so poorly are, first, the weakness of our pension programs, and second, stinginess of our healthcare system, which even with Medicare for the elderly, is far weaker than that of nations such as Austria. Economists used to speak of retirement security as a three-legged stool. Pensions were one stool, savings were another, and Social Security was the third. Today, two legs of the stool have been shattered, and anti-Social Security advocates are sawing away at the third. Ninth, the American dream was based on the idea that immigrants became part of America. A combination of cheap transportation and enormous disparities in income across countries has inspired unprecedented numbers of people to upward. There are now 230 million people around the world living outside the country of their birth, 46 million of them in the United States. Not surprisingly, immigration tends to flow from poor places to rich ones. In the world's 18 richest countries, immigrants constitute 16% of the population. If one includes those who are descendants of recent immigrants, that percentage is significantly larger and is certain to grow, since immigrants generally have more children than domestic populations. Consider that, in 2010, 30% of the United States population was born outside the country. Yet 24% of these younger than 18 have foreign-born parents. Policymakers in rich countries have tended to treat immigration as a challenge, but a surmountable one. Previous eras of mass migration produced good outcomes for immigrants and settlement countries alike. The vast pool of immigrants that arrived in the United States prior to 1914 that included Christian Arabs, Greeks, Hungarians, Italians, Japanese, Jews from the Russian Empire, and Scandinavians, assimilated rapidly and contributed to an economic boom. Similarly, since World War II, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand have successfully absorbed large numbers of immigrants from varied countries and backgrounds. But it would be a mistake to assume that those experiences will be repeated for all immigrants. There's reason to believe that many recent immigrants to both the United States and Europe will have a much more difficult time than their predecessors. Meanwhile, the countries in which they settle are less likely to see the benefits of immigration as they experience heightened social tensions and widening social inequality. Policymakers would be wise to take those risks into account. Rather than focus on policy for integrating new immigrants, they should concentrate on avoiding selection policies that tend to create near permanent ethnic or religious underclasses. The successful assimilation of earlier immigrants is often misunderstood. It's true that they managed to achieve equality in income, education, and wealth within populations within 1 or 2 generations. On the basis of that experience, many have assumed that social mobility rates, the speed with which the children of families of low or high incomes, wealth, and education approach average, are inherently rapid in modern societies, and that as a result, any immigrant was likely to assimilate quickly. But recent evidence suggests that, in reality, social mobility rates are extremely low. 7 to 10 generations are required before the descendants of high and low status families achieve average status. Thus, in modern Sweden, the descendants of 18th century nobility are still heavily overrepresented 300 years later. Among higher social status groups, doctors, attorneys, the wealthy, members of the Swedish Royal Academias. In the United Kingdom, the descendants of families who sent a son to Oxford or Cambridge around 1800 are still 4 times as likely to attend these universities as the average person. Social mobility rates have also been relatively impervious to government policy. There are no higher in societies like Sweden, with generous interventions in favor of the children of disadvantaged families and demoralize a fair United States. For that matter, there are no higher in modern Sweden than 18th century Sweden or medieval England. Immigrants who quickly assimilated to a new society in countries of the United States were often positively fled from the ascending populations. The Scandinavians who settled the upper Midwest were not desperate. huddle masses but a representative selection from a literate, if poor, society. The Jews of the Russian Empire were certainly poor, but they were an educated elite within their home societies. Immigrant groups with low social status at the time of their arrival historically had a more difficult time integrating. The evidence shows that immigrant groups tend to retain the social status that they arrive with. The same goes for recent immigrants to the United States. Due to visa restrictions, certain immigrant groups were permitted entry in the United States only if they could prove that they had skills that were needed in the U.S. labor market. For example, Africans, Chinese, Christian Arabs, Filipinos, Indians, Iranians, and Koreans who did get entry in the United States were from the upper echelons of their own societies. And in the United States, they enjoy significantly higher than average social status, as measured again by number of doctors per 1,000 members of the group. Groups who, for various reasons, did not face the same restrictions, including the Hmong, Latinos, and Maya, into the United States with low social status and struggled to achieve upward mobility since. Immigration to the United States, in other words, rarely changes one's social status. Given current patterns of immigration to the United States, Washington faces enormous policy change. 2 in 5 of all immigrants to the United States are from Mexico and Central America. Latinos now constitute 22% of all children in the United States. By 2050, they're expected to be now 39%. But the social status of Latinos, even those born in the United States, is persistently low. This perhaps shouldn't be a surprise given that migrants from Mexico and Central America tend to be negatively selected from their home populations in the first place. They are often the people who found themselves in such desperate economic circumstances at home that they preferred to live as illegal immigrants in the United States. Latinos constitute nearly half of the foreign-born in the United States, but 4 in 5 of illegal migrants. Effects have been dire. There can be no doubt that immigration is widening social inequality in the United States. Last 10th, the actual cost of the American dream. No idea is more central to Americans' outlook than the American dream. They believe that with hard work and the freedom to pursue your destiny, you can achieve success and provide better opportunities for your own children. Yet, an analysis by USA Today, conducted on June 4, 2014, shows the living American dream will cost the average family of 4 about $130,000 per year. Only 16 million U.S. households, around 1 in 8, earned that much in 2013, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. In an interview, co-author Thomas Herschel, a professor at Cornell University, suggested that for the dozens of people that were surveyed and interviewed, American dream was not about becoming one of the 1%. It's not about getting rich and making a lot of money. It's about security, he said. It's also as much about hope for the next generation as about the success of this one. They want to feel that their children are going to have a better life than they did, said Herschel. In their book, the authors write that besides economic security, the American dream includes finding and pursuing a rewarding career, living a healthy and personally fulfilling life, and being able to retire in comfort. With that in mind, USA Today added up the estimated cost of living an American dream, and it's as follows. Home ownership is essential to the American dream. So we took the median price of a new home, $275,000, projected 10% down payment, and projected an annual cost of a 30-year mortgage at 4% interest. We also added annual maintenance cost of 1% of the purchase price, total being $17,062 a year. We used the U.S. Department of Agriculture's April 2014 figure of $12,659 for a moderate cost grocery plan for a family of 4. In May, AAA estimated it would cost $11,039 a year to own a 4-wheel drive utility vehicle. The Living Medical Index pegged annual health insurance premiums and out-of-pocket medical expenses at $9,144. We used various estimates for the cost of restaurants and entertainment, on family summer vacation, clothing, utilities, cable to satellite, internet and cell phone, miscellaneous expenses. Total federal, state, and local taxes were pegged at 30% for households at this income level, based on a model developed for Citizens for Tax Justice. USA Today calculated current educational expenses for 2 children at $4,000 a year, and college savings, all with pre-tax, they assumed at $2,500 per year per child, based on various rules of thumb. Finally, the maximum annual pre-tax contribution to a retirement plan for people under 50 years of age is $70,500. That's slightly less than 50% of this American dream household's annual earnings, in line with financial planners' recommendations. The final total is $130,357. It sounds like a lot, and it is in a country where the median household income is about $51,000. Add 1 more child and a vehicle, and you could easily reach $150,000. In conclusion, the American dream of our founding fathers down to retiring baby generation is now dead. The rugged individualism of our forefathers have been placed with all the knowing nature of a large bureaucratic government-based solution. The American dream has been morphed into Harrison Bergeron or 1984. It's not an American dream, but it is the American nightmare. Prepared to accept the 18 points of evidence that we have presented to show the American dream is dead, and both petitioners in this case. And with that, we turn the arguments over to you.
Hello?
Go ahead, we can hear you.
All right. Our argument will be composed of 3 parts. This, the first, will consist of a multitude of examples throughout the American history that illustrate the dynamic nature of the American dream. Its evolution to the present, as well as provide support for the central argument, as well as be present in the second part. The third is simply an index reference sheet of compiled quotes and information to be used as a refute. The American dream is a cultural ideal held by the majority of Americans at a given time or generation, and is dependent upon the same influences that give rise to that culture, and in turn influences that culture itself. The American dream can perhaps be best represented by the statements of the actions of one of the founding fathers. In the words of George Washington, liberty, when it begins to take root, is a plan of rapid growth. This example is poignant and demonstrates one major influence of the American culture, the concept of liberty based on the basic human dignity, as was prevalent in Enlightenment philosophy. Another memorable quote from Washington describes the foundation of American independence and patriotism, and another example of an early American dream. Happiness and moral duty are inseparably connected. These words and the revolution that embodied constitute the beginning of the American dream. The American sense of nationality was further put to the test during the Civil War to see whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure, to use the words of President Lincoln. This exhibiting the ideals and embodying the dream of the American people, a unified continental republic. The American dream at this time wasn't all racial equality. It was also the reunification of the Union. Another example of the American dream as presented by its definition is during World War I, when Woodrow Wilson said that this motivational quote, "You are not here merely to make a living. You are here in order to enable the world to live more amply with greater vision, with a finer spirit of hope and achievement. You are here to enrich the world and impoverish yourself if you forget the errand." This relates to the influx of immigration as exhibited throughout this era. The dream of immigrants during this time was one found only within the borders of America, with the freedom, equality, and opportunity available to all who make the effort, gambling the future of both them and their families. Also, this dream fluctuates, and its main priority remains the same throughout up until now. The American dream, even though not coined until 1931, doesn't mean that it wasn't present in its past or won't be present in the future, as the American dream has been defined as a social idea for prosperity or life of ideal of that person. This can be anything such as a decent job, being debtless, or even just freedom. If the American dream is truly dead, why are over 1 million immigrants still trying to come here to make a better life? Escape.
Well enough. The following is the second central part of our argument, and will present the logical process by which we arrived at our conclusion. Our defense of the existence of the American dream will first address the subject of its definition. As demonstrated by our previous speaker, the dream has meant different things to different people at different times. Even its accepted definition varies according to the source. Therefore, this term has a primarily subjective meaning, yet nevertheless maintains some consistent connotation that perpetuates its use. We have compared various definitions and perceptions to arrive at a concise, workable, and hopefully agreeable definition that resolves the issue of subjectivity. The American dream is the cultural ideal held by a majority of Americans in a given time period or generation, is dependent upon the same influences that gave rise to American culture, and in turn influences that culture itself. Therefore, we will feel secure in our argument if the current cultural ideal, despite being necessarily dynamic, reflects American culture and is held by a majority of the Americans. The first part of our definition is dependent upon the existence of an American ideal, that is, an ideal held by a majority of Americans, or at least culturally prominent. Many examples from history are apparent, but many are also present today. For example, when asked if United States veterans deserve respect, I am certain that the overwhelming majority today would say that they do. The majority of Americans certainly also do not want corrupt politicians in office. Just from these two examples, it would be reasonable to say that the majority of Americans want a fair system of rewards and punishments in society. Therefore, justice is part of the modern American dream. The second part of the definition involves differences between generations. If one were to question Americans during the Vietnam War era, one would most likely find that the majority would be against American intervention in foreign wars. Whereas during the post-9/11 era, the majority of Americans would be far more pro-intervention. Due to this drastic variation between generations, the American dream can be seen as a dynamic concept, and therefore its existence is not dependent upon its resemblance to any previous forms. The third, compound part of the definition involves the American dream's relationship to American culture at any given time. Examples of how American culture has projected itself in the form of the American dream are abundant throughout the nation's history. An example of this today would be how American culture's propensity for glorifying social success projects itself in the form of a national dream of such success. On the other hand, the American dream itself has been shown throughout history as influencing American culture. Another example demonstrating this is prevalent in the relationship between the previous generation and the current one. The previous generation can fairly be said to have had part of its American dream embodied by the ideal of owning a secure and independent household. The pursuit of this dream resulted in the cultural state apparent in the older generations today. All of these examples just serve to illustrate the reasoning behind the statement that the American dream is a dynamic and ongoing concept that has and continues to influence American culture and thinking. As a final note, it must be pointed out that despite its mostly subjective nature, the dream has a continuous ideal that is apparent in all of its manifestations. This is the potential for freedom, equality, and opportunity naturally available to all Americans, put in place at the foundation of the United States and solidified by the actions of its citizens. We have a third part to this argument. This will be presented by Tyler Sloan, another junior, who wasn't able to introduce himself before.
You have made claims of the following. One, that we argued that the American dream was based on individualism. Two, that the American dream has not been replaced or changed forms, but that it is dead. Both of these we will counter. Primarily, the dream is a concept that is dependent upon change. We need to note that there has always been social and political strife throughout the country. This does not mean that the social, economic, and political systems do not allow success to be possible for every individual. In fact, troubles in American history have always proven to fuel the American dream for those under oppression. For example, the racial issues of the 1960s were brought to the eyes of our country by Martin Luther King Jr. Right? Although his rights were being heavily fought, he followed his dream and left the country changed. This is the cornerstone of the American dream. We may fight for the freedom against our perceived lack of freedom. Current economic troubles in America do not support the decaying of the American dream. It has never been easier to accomplish money-making goals. For example, higher-paying careers such as those in law, medicine, and entrepreneurship are now available to every person through education. Those with goals that achieve little money, such as artists and educators, have their own unique American dreams. This means that their low economic standings does not support the decaying of the American dream because money is typically not their preferred source of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yes, student loans debt are at an all-time high. We have recently experienced a recession. Does this mean that our goals are destroyed because we are in debt? Absolutely not. It can be argued that the economic troubles in this country do not reflect all American dreams.
Let's go to questions. You want to?
Good questions. Yeah. Come on, Tyler. All right. Well, we'll confer first. If you have one, we'll think about one while you're presenting it. We'll answer, and then maybe you will present a question, and then we will. Does that sound?
Go ahead. That'd be fine.
Yeah, we can just go back and forth.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
So I believe that you stated that part of the American dream, or defining the American dream, is that of happiness. In fact, he quoted George Washington speaking of happiness and morals, for example. But if the American dream is defined by happiness, then wouldn't you have to agree if it's dead? Most Americans today aren't happy with their current living situation because of the mountain of debt, whether it be student or regular debt, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, debt doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be happy. Debt is just a monetary unit. Happiness can be exaggerated in other things. So your American dream, a current American dream, yes, is more of a monetary.
Right, but even then, to that point, if you agree that there's debt and you agree it's monetary, that would be an admission that the American dream is failing or it's dead. But even if you didn't, if you still define it just by happiness in general, most Americans aren't happy today with their current situation, whether you're talking in a monetary sense, an emotional sense, or a moral sense, just because of their current situation. So wouldn't you have to agree that the American dream is dead if you're defining it by happiness, because most Americans aren't happy today?
I'll let my partner answer this one.
First, I would like to ask you why you think the American dream is dependent upon happiness.
So I'm quoting your partner, and when he was your first speaker, and when he stated that about happiness and morals, he quoted something by George Washington. And saying, so now I'm asking you, in defining American dream, if you use George Washington's quote, talking about happiness, for example, I'm now posing the question to you. If the American dream is dependent upon happiness, for example, according to the quote you cited and your logic of your first speech, if most Americans aren't happy today because of their current living situation, would you agree the American dream is dead today?
Perhaps the purpose of that quote, or specifically the purpose, was not offered as a definition. We have a page here. Tyler, could you please give me that little page with definitions down over there? The purpose of that quote was specifically to illustrate how the American dream was perceived at the foundation of America itself. Just a moment, please. I'm here to talk about all the quotes from everyone. We relied not so much on definitions and facts and such, but here we have done a lot of citing, a lot of collections on other quotations from various famous people for the purpose of, as I said about the quote from George Washington, illustrating how the American dream is not about necessarily happiness. It might have been that at a certain point. For example, many of the examples, I used example twice. Many of the examples you use involve happiness. Many of the time periods that you selected, at that point, in those particular time periods, happiness was probably indeed part of the American dream. But not all cultures, not all American eras, deal exclusively with happiness. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry I'm a little tongue-tied, but.
No, that's completely fine. So I just have a follow-up question, then we can move on to you, to some questions you can pose to me. So a follow-up question for that is, today, currently, in our contemporary society, do you believe do you believe the American dream is dependent upon some form of happiness or some level of happiness, for example?
No, I believe the American dream is dependent upon the influences that mold the culture of the day. So our American dream, the modern one, even between you and me, our dream about what America can be and what we can be in America as Americans is dependent upon what we see in the world around America and in America itself, which is itself molded by that American dream. It's a little confusing, I'm sure, but the reason I arrived at that definition was just looking at all of these and realizing that if you're going to define anything, it cannot be completely subjective. So my goal was to come up.
Please pardon the interruption. At this time, we are now officially done testing. All students should be at their eighth grade class. Students that were tested, please report to your eighth grade class. We are here to get a schedule to the end of the day. Thank you all very much.
Okay, so at this time, my partner and I will have a few other questions for you a bit later, but now I'd like to turn over the chance for you to ask us some questions about our arguments and our interpretation of the American dream, if you had any for us.
Just a moment, please. All right, you have a question?
Yes.
All right.
Why I think it was in your first speech, why was it based so much on like home mortgages and other arguments of that such? Because the American dream is not always based upon a house or anything that's materialized.
Mm-hmm. Well, my partner can correct me if I'm wrong, and she can add in, but I believe the concept of applying mortgages, for example, is inherent upon the belief that the American dream, when it was first created, regardless of the definition, the time period considered definition to be created and instituted, is a part of, yes, owning one's home. It stands for being able to provide for oneself, being able to make it on your own. After a home that accompanies with getting married and eventually having take a front porch kind of outlook on life, which you cannot do without having first a house. So when that becomes unaffordable, unattainable, and impossible to have without mountains of debt, and when it becomes even more affordable in your life to not have a home or to not have children, to not get married, you have to agree that the American dream is failing to exist for Americans today. And that's why we use the mortgage example.
All right.
One final bit of a question for me. You defined, when you were speaking, you seemed to lean toward the idea that the American dream was defined, well, dependent upon happiness. Wow, I already forgot where I was going with this. Now I feel really dumb. Yep, and it's really awkward. Just standing here.
Would you like us to give you a few seconds to think about it?
Yeah. Or you can offer your rebuttal. That'll be fine.
We have some few other questions for you. I'll ask
All right.
And then my partner can ask some. My first question right now is, I believe it was the end of your first speaker's speech, I'm sorry, I can't actually remember when it was. One of your speakers talked about immigrants and the desirability of immigrants to immigrate to our country and find a better life for themselves. And he posed a rhetorical kind of question to at the end of his speech, saying that the American dream is dead, and why are 1 million immigrants still coming here today? But I would answer that and saying the reason why so many are still coming is that they find that the situation in America, as bad as it is still better than the situations they may have had at home. That's when so many countries want to push out those people in society that are at the lowest of the low. But if we see the immigrant society today, statistically 4 out of 5 Latinos are making it ahead and are in fact illegal in our country. And I can use the immigrants example as proof that the American dream is still alive today, when so many of those immigrants are even worse off than many Americans today. Or Native Americans, I should say.
4 minutes shorter question for
If I could summarize that and make it shorter for you, just how can you use immigrants as proof of the American dream today when so many are still in a harsh situation today, even worse than most true Americans, Native Americans?
Because even though it may be harsh, they still do have an equal opportunity, as it's coined. And if you look at it, really, why wouldn't, even if you're coming from a harsh situation, you always want to better yourself. So them coming here is bettering their chance for their family or if they're coming by themselves, bettering their own opportunities. And just your American dream is what you see fit. And the American dream, as it's coined, can mean almost anything to that person. So I use the immigrant example because it was prominent during the 1920s around California and Staten Island to show that the immigrants have indeed succeeded throughout time.
Finally remembered. I now have the gist of what I meant to say. I don't want to interrupt you, but it's just going to be a short statement. Do you claim that the American dream relies on happiness, and that is why it's dead?
Happiness is a factor, yes.
All right. Do you believe that happiness is no longer part of the current cultural situation?
In many aspects, no. For a given example, we use the family vacation time as an example for the American dream, because most Americans, 175 million days go unclaimed each year by Americans. There is not an incentive to go on vacation. It's not a lot of leisure time or relaxed time when you're working, because there's a lot of, just stressed out and strenuous Americans in these situations in which they cannot relax or unwind. Therefore, there's a significant amount of time when they're unhappy because they can't unwind.
So you'd say the changes in society have led to this decrease in happiness and therefore a weakening, if not complete death, of the American dream?
Precisely.
All right. I would say, however, that on the other hand, on the flip side of that, many of these social changes have also led to the increase of happiness. Look, for example, on the increased quality of life that has, you point to the downsides, stress, monetary problems, but you can also look at health issues, safety issues. On the whole, I would be willing to say that American culture, or the society that we live in, has been improving. Maybe that's the best word to put it. Would you have a response to that?
I would dispute that argument by saying that there's two things. One, there's a perceived sense of advancement, depends what you about advancement, but you're saying to society as a whole. Well, I mean, society is always going to appear to look better. We're always getting new types of technology and since there's new people, there's always new people applying for college and that nature. You're always advancing and evolving. And certainly as you get older, it may seem like things are getting better culturally for you. However, this is too, the real reality is when you look at it statistically, as we've done in our 18 points, it actually isn't better for you in the long run, nor will it be for your children and their children and so on.
I believe that's a valid point. This increase in complexity can be misconstrued as progress, but I will still defend my defense of the existence of the American dream based on the perception of it as a dynamic subject, a dynamic concept. So would you have any way to attack the American dream as a dynamic concept, that it still exists, simply in a different form? Many of your points did cover that. However, I don't think they suitably dealt with the fact that it was dependent upon the culture itself, and the cultural change was parallel with it.
Yes, so there's a slight exercise I could show you right now, and then afterwards my partner has a question for you, if that would be okay. So first of all, you personally, what do you have to do in your life to achieve the American dream?
Well, as I view the American dream right now, and I don't even have that paper with me. Oh. I would define the American dream as what, I had it written down already. I had my own definition. Please name it.
You said something along the lines of the cultural impacts or the cultural surroundings and atmosphere of a nation.
To answer this question, I would have to look at the cultural ideal of today. When you think of a cultural ideal, maybe the best example of the modern one would be success. Who do you hear about on the news? Who do you read about? Who do you see? I don't think success is necessarily the best part of the world, but I believe it might be an important factor in the American dream itself. I do not defend the existence of an American dream based on ideological support of it. I base it on what I perceive as what it is, a dream held by the American people that evolves with them. So, trying to not babble so much, but I believe that to follow the American dream, if that was my goal, it would be to be as successful as I could to improve not just America, but the world.
Would that include perhaps going to college, making something out of your life, having kids and getting married, making sure your own children would have the best opportunities, for example, et cetera, et cetera?
Perhaps. The best answer when considering college. Keep in mind that many of the most successful people out there never went to college.
That's true, but I was asking you personally, and you personally feel that you could be successful without going to college, for example?
I believe personally anyone could be successful without going to college.
But I'm asking yourself.
Do you believe he could?
Do I believe
Yes.
that I could
Yes.
become successful? I believe that given whatever circumstances may arise, I could become successful without going to college. I could also become successful while racking up a massive college debt and pay it off who knows how many years down the road.
Right. And do you think most Americans would agree with that same type of mantra or ideology? That they would consider themselves a success, even with mountain levels of debt that they may never pay off in their lifetime, even getting a college degree, but just never getting a job, not being affordable to have children or get married, even own a home. Even when they do own a home, never being able to pay it off, not being able to provide down the road for their children, et cetera, et cetera. You think most Americans would agree with your concept of the American dream for success? Because the statistics show that most wouldn't, and then most don't.
Well, I think the growing trends you're pointing out, see that a lot of people are attempting to do those things. Rack up a lot of debt, go through college despite the difficulties of it.
Worse in our country than it was where they came from.
This is my partner had a question for you if you wouldn't mind asking for her or answering her.
In your past argument, you admitted that student loan debt was the highest, correct? As it's ever been, correct?
Here, could you call in Tyler up here? Just a moment, please.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So if student loan debt has been the highest it's ever been before, you wouldn't be able to be successful because of how much debt you would have to pay off. Therefore, the American dream is dead. Correct?
No.
It does not say that
It says it can be argued that the economic troubles in this country does not reflect the American dream. So you hand me this other paper. We can argue that the American dream is one of wealth, and it is achieved by planning and hard work and honesty. Therefore,
I can answer this.
you can.
Yes.
I'll do that.
Just because the loan rate is so high doesn't mean a person who's actually willing to succeed and wants to succeed won't strive no matter how much it'll cost. So even if the loans are at an all-time high, it's not going to hold anybody back if they're truly wanting to achieve that American dream that's still there.
So, okay, could you name me one person who's been successful in the American dream who graduated with college debt?
One of the teachers here at our school, she has 3 degrees and has now got it to where she has no college debt.
So you would agree that she's completed the American dream then?
Yes.
So then you agree that college is a part of the American dream. That completing college, getting degrees is a part of the American dream.
Accomplishing your goals.
Accomplish the goals that you have set is the American dream. She wanted to go to college to be a teacher, and that was her American dream.
So it's whatever. Wait. So Has a lot of expectations. There's always whatever goal you set for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's subjective.
So if my goal is to kill a mass amount of people and I do that, then I've completed the American dream.
That isn't at all what you're saying. That's not the
I know exactly. That's what you said. You said it's the goal that you set for yourself to complete. So if my goal is to kill a mass amount of people and I do that, have I completed the American dream?
To the betterment.
If my goal is to keep certain amounts of African Americans still in subordination by not offering them jobs, being racist, and being a hate-filled person, does that mean I completed the American dream? You just said it, and you broadened it to any goal that anyone sets to complete that they do complete.
Perhaps I could specify what we mean there. The definition is subjective. However, it still has to fall into those guidelines. Earlier, I had mentioned that the current modern American dream, as I perceive it, had to do with accomplishing your goals, as that same teacher did, that we speak of, for the betterment of the community around you. Well, America is what I said, but I think it could be restated to that, and to the world at large. So long as you accomplish something that makes your life and other lives better. In no way would massacring someone make your life better. In no way does demeaning someone because of any difference between you and him or her, in no way does that improve your life.
If you wanted to do it, wouldn't that make your life better? You self-fulfill yourself. Maybe you can be more prideful. So wouldn't that fulfill yourself?
No. I do not judge emotion or emotional satisfaction as the kind of success the American dream right now.
Yeah, then if you do this by emotion, how do you know if you fulfilled yourself or completed that goal?
Maybe I look at things a little bit too logically when it comes to this, but I am not looking for satisfaction as part of that American dream, simply satisfaction of your goal. The only emotional response that is being taken for granted here as part of this whole deal is that which comes the satisfaction of accomplishing a goal, happiness, self-respect, accomplishment.
So going back to your teacher, is your teacher fully satisfied with her current life and living situation?
Yes.
She's gotten?
Yes, she is completely satisfied with what she has accomplished with her life. Right. It has improved her, it has improved the lives of the people around her.
So then with your teacher, would you agree, and do you realize that for every one of your teachers, I don't know her name, but there's at least 100,000 Americans who are on the other end, who graduated maybe with a degree, but can't find the job, have mountains of debt, or maybe even didn't make the most of their college experience and having to go in deeper debt because they failed their credit hours and had to continue on with college and make it all up. So your teacher is a special case, wouldn't you agree? And that's not commonplace for most Americans, they have to graduate with debt?
Perhaps not. Now, if you will give me a moment to confer, I'll give you one last response and then maybe one more question. And then I guess you guys, would you like to move? How many questions do you have left? I'm not trying to avoid this one.
No, but after after your team gets a chance to have ask questions and such and confer, then we'll move to our rebuttal and we can end the debate following that.
All right, just give us a moment. We'll answer this and then present one of our own, and then we'll let you do your rebuttal.
Certainly.
All right. This ain't so the point that he's making is that the American dream, that there are a lot of people that are not true. All right. All right, I have a rough answer for you, my best one. Even though the American dream is to do your best to get this goal and to accomplish something, it is not suggesting a lack of an American dream if you fail. I think that might be the best way to put it. This teacher has accomplished her goal and she is satisfied, as the American dream would want her, as her perception of the American dream tells her that her best effort to accomplish her goal is what's required of her as an American, or at least best for her. That's when you're dealing with really subjective terms. This is not a physical thing, not a tangible idea we're speaking of. When you're talking about all these people with debt and so on, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're unhappy just because they haven't been able to do this one thing in their life. When you look at, let's say, clergy members or people in seminaries and different callings that aren't necessarily financial, that you don't have to deal with money as much, they might be perfectly happy and have absolutely no money, not just be in debt.
Yeah, like a vile poverty.
Yeah. I'd leave. Oh, well, we're down one more member, so it's just two of us now. Well, we'll think of just one quick question. I'm sorry if I haven't answered this, but it was a very good question from you. If I haven't answered it. All right, do we have any questions? We have no further questions for your group. However, we do have one statement. Because America. That's all. We're going to hand it off to you and let you finish your rebuttal. Finish off.
You want to do something really good? Do your rebuttal is let America be America again. I like that one good. Yes.
All right, so the process of this rebuttal will be as follows. I'll present the main arguments for us that have won us today, and second, countering the opposition today. So first, I'd like to point out the poll statistics that we use throughout both of our arguments have not been attacked and have not lost any ground today. Because of that, the numbers don't lie, and they point to the fact that whether it's you're in debt, or it's more affordable to not have children, or you can never pay off your mortgage, et cetera, you see it in the monetary sense or not, the American dream is unattainable, in fact, impossible, as most Americans would agree, as you see with CNN's poll, as well as US Today reporting, and even the Census Bureau. Second, looking at our definition of the American dream, as defined by James Russell at 1931, as life should be better, richer, and fuller for everyone, we see that because these ideals are not met currently in society, in fact, they're harshly pushed against. Not only do you have to apply our definition of the American dream because it was actually defined, there's actually definitive nature to it, but also, again, is not being achieved in society. And last third, when comparing the average citizen today, whether they're happy or not, whether you consider it as being some type of success in their nature and achieving goals, we would agree that that's also an important and key aspect. But the reality is that most Americans either cannot do that, or those who are perceived to have done that are actually still unhappy or feel they have not achieved the American dream. And really that's what it boils down to, whether you yourself feel that you have done it or you actually felt that satisfaction or not. But if you're not, even someone else would be envious of you. If you feel that you haven't achieved the American dream, then you really haven't. To the next phase of the rebuttal, and last phase, looking at the faults in our opponent's case. First, when they spoke of the satisfaction as well as successful nature. Well, we would assert that for satisfaction to occur, that most college students who can't find a job today, or former college students who can't find a job today, who are in debt, most Americans who want to have children but can't afford it, who can never pay off their home, most workers who never get paid vacation, family vacations, most immigrants who are looking for a better life but actually don't have a better life, it's either the same or in fact worse. With all these factors and more, we see this because all these people are not being satisfied. We see that the American dream is in fact dead, and that's a huge flaw in our opponent's case in terms of satisfaction. There's also a lot of inconsistencies with first the whole happiness thing, and again the whole success factor. First saying you should not necessarily be successful on an individual basis. You have to be successful. Then looking at the teacher, for example, looking at classifying her as American success or American dream success, but you have to agree that college would be a success factor. And then with the mountains of debt that are present today, that most Americans wouldn't qualify themselves as had achieving the American dream. You need to do it on an individual basis. You have to see that that's too broad, because it would see or affirm that just doing anything that someone can achieve, self-fulfill themselves, it literally can be anything, such as, yes, killing mass amounts of people can't fulfill any person for their own personal American dream, which is, if you go for self-fulfillment, you have to agree that there are certain parameters in place. And last third, we believe that because there is no definitive definition today for our opponent's effort, American dream, it was thrown around many times and never had a consistent basis, it should apply our American basis of American Dream today. And even if you did have their inconsistent definition of American Dream, that because it would still be unattainable and impossible. In fact, even more impossible because it's entirely harder to fulfill self-identity and self-American dream society as opposed to more broad in the sense, then that affirms our case even further. With that, we find no rightful other course of action but to vote in favor of the petitioners today of the Valle side. Thank you for your time today, and the American dream is clearly dead in society.
Good game.
Thank you for your time today, and that concludes the debate, I believe. It was a wonderful experience, and of course we got some good head knocking in there as well as some chuckles in here and there. So
Yeah.
definitely had a blast. But I always want to thank you for your time and showing up and continuing with us on for as long as we have today.
We stand in awe of your superior speaking skills. Yes, you did a very good job. I'm impressed. I mean, I'm sure I could argue a little bit longer, but yeah, I'm not going to try.
But of course, it takes not only to take a lot out of you, but it's